Forward. One of the greatest tragedies in relationships involving an avoidant is that the most important emotional turning point often looks exactly like the beginning of the end. Forward. The very behaviors that can signal growing vulnerability are frequently mistaken for fading interest. Forward. An avoidant who is quietly struggling with emotions they can no longer suppress rarely appears confident or emotionally clear. Instead, they often look uncertain. Forward. They hesitate before responding. They become thoughtful in situations where they once seemed emotionally detached. They may pause during conversations, change their mind, forward, or struggle to explain what they are feeling. To someone expecting a straightforward expression of love, these reactions can seem frustrating. Forward. To someone who understands avoidant psychology, they often reveal an internal battle that has finally reached the surface. Forward. This confusion exists because emotional vulnerability feels unfamiliar to many avoidants. For years, emotional distance provided clear answers. If a relationship became overwhelming, forward, they created space. If conflict became intense, they withdrew. Their defensive system followed a familiar pattern that required very little emotional risk. Forward. Once those defenses begin weakening, certainty disappears. They suddenly experience emotions that do not fit their usual way of coping. They want closeness, but fear dependence. Forward. They want honesty, but fear rejection. They want connection, but worry they will fail at maintaining it. These competing emotions create hesitation. From the outside, forward, hesitation looks like uncertainty about the relationship. On the inside, it often reflects uncertainty about how to manage feelings they spent years avoiding. Forward. Unfortunately, many partners interpret this slower emotional progress as rejection. Modern relationships often encourage quick emotional clarity. Forward. People are told that if someone truly cares, they will immediately communicate every feeling. Real attachment patterns rarely follow that simple path. Emotional growth, forward, especially for someone with deeply rooted avoidant defenses, often develops slowly. Small steps replace dramatic breakthroughs. A conversation becomes slightly more open. Forward. A difficult discussion lasts a little longer. A person who normally disappears after conflict returns the next day instead. Forward. These changes may not satisfy someone longing for immediate reassurance, but they represent meaningful progress within the avoidance emotional world. Forward. One lesser-known fact about attachment psychology is that emotional speed differs between attachment styles. Forward. Someone with secure attachment may process emotions relatively quickly because vulnerability feels familiar and safe. Avoidants often require much more time. Forward. Their nervous system carefully evaluates every emotional experience before deciding whether it feels safe enough to continue. Forward. This slower pace is frequently misunderstood as lack of interest. In reality, forward, it may reflect the enormous effort required for the avoidant to remain emotionally present, while their protective instincts are telling them to escape. As disappointment grows, forward, many partners naturally increase emotional pressure. They ask for immediate answers. They demand certainty. They want clear commitments. Forward. These reactions are understandable because uncertainty creates anxiety. Yet, this pressure often creates the exact outcome they hope to avoid. Forward. The avoidant's deepest fear is frequently not intimacy itself, but the possibility of failing another person's emotional expectations. When conversations become filled with urgency, forward, their nervous system interprets the situation as emotional danger rather than emotional opportunity. Forward. This fear of emotional failure is rarely discussed, yet it influences many avoidant behaviors. Forward. Some avoidants secretly believe they are incapable of giving another person everything they deserve. They fear disappointing someone they genuinely care about. Forward. Instead of risking repeated failure, the defensive system encourages withdrawal. Distance feels safer than staying close and making mistakes. Forward. This explains why an avoidant who begins opening emotionally may suddenly retreat after one difficult conversation. It is not always because their feelings disappeared. Forward. Sometimes their fear became stronger than their growing desire for connection. Pressure intensifies this conflict. Forward. Emotional demands that seem reasonable to one person may feel overwhelming to someone whose nervous system still associates vulnerability with danger. Questions repeated too often. Forward. Constant requests for reassurance. Emotional ultimatums. Endless discussions about the future. Forward. These experiences can overload an avoidant who is already struggling with unfamiliar emotions. Their protective system quickly returns to the strategy that has worked for years. Forward. Create distance, reduce emotional intensity, restore control. Forward. This sudden withdrawal confuses many partners because it often happens immediately after a meaningful emotional breakthrough. An avoidant shares something deeply personal. Forward. They admit missing someone. They express genuine affection. Then, almost without warning, they become quiet or distant again. To the other person, this feels dishonest. Forward. It appears as though the emotional openness was never real. In many cases, the opposite is true. The openness was so real that it activated intense vulnerability. Forward. After lowering emotional defenses, the avoidant feels exposed. Their nervous system reacts by rebuilding those defenses as quickly as possible. Forward. Psychologists sometimes describe this as an emotional recoil. The avoidant moves closer than their nervous system feels prepared to handle. Forward. The resulting discomfort triggers an automatic retreat. This retreat is often temporary, but it becomes permanent when both people misunderstand what is happening. Forward. The partner sees rejection. The avoidant feels overwhelmed. Neither recognizes that the relationship has reached one of its most emotionally significant moments. Forward. Another surprising detail is that avoidants often judge themselves harshly after these experiences. They notice their own inconsistency. Forward. They become frustrated by their inability to stay emotionally open. Forward. Some even feel ashamed because they genuinely wanted to remain connected but could not tolerate the emotional intensity for very long. Instead of discussing these feelings, forward, they hide them behind silence. That silence then convinces the other person that nothing meaningful ever existed. The emotional opening itself is usually brief. Forward. It does not remain available forever. It requires patience, emotional stability, and careful observation to recognize its true meaning. Forward. Reacting too quickly can close the window before lasting growth has a chance to develop. Dismissing it completely can erase months of quiet psychological progress. Forward. Understanding this delicate stage changes everything because the response during these moments often determines whether the avoidant slowly builds greater emotional security or retreats once again into the familiar safety of old defensive patterns. Forward. Where the final outcome depends less on dramatic gestures and far more on the steady choices made after vulnerability first appears. Forward. Explain why emotional steadiness is more effective than intense reassurance. Discuss maintaining healthy boundaries while remaining emotionally available. Forward. Encourage responding to vulnerability without overwhelming the avoidant. Explain the importance of allowing emotional processing time. Discuss reinforcing trust through consistency rather than emotional intensity. Clarify that genuine change happens through repeated safe experiences, not one emotional breakthrough. Emphasize that patients should never replace self-respect or healthy relationship standards. Once an avoidant begins showing signs of genuine emotional change, many people believe the hardest part is over. In reality, this is often the most delicate stage of the entire relationship. The emotional walls may have started to crack, but they have not disappeared. The protective system is still active. It is still watching for anything that feels overwhelming, unpredictable, or emotionally unsafe. This is why the response during this period matters so much. One reaction can quietly strengthen the growing sense of trust. Another can unintentionally convince the avoidant that opening up was a mistake. The first thing to understand is that emotional steadiness is far more powerful than emotional intensity. Many people respond to an avoidance vulnerability with overwhelming excitement. They begin asking for deeper conversations every day. They expect constant reassurance. They want immediate clarity about the future. These reactions come from hope, but they often create pressure instead of safety. The avoidance nervous system does not measure love by emotional intensity. It measures safety by emotional predictability. Calm responses send a message that vulnerability will not lead to chaos. That message slowly becomes more convincing than any passionate speech ever could. One lesser-known fact about emotional regulation is that the human nervous system learns through repeated experiences, not isolated moments. One safe conversation feels encouraging. 20 safe conversations begin changing expectations. One respectful disagreement feels unusual. Many respectful disagreements begin creating a new emotional reality. This gradual learning process explains why dramatic emotional breakthroughs rarely create lasting transformation by themselves. The brain trusts patterns more than promises. Every calm response becomes another piece of evidence that emotional closeness no longer has to end in pain. Healthy boundaries play an equally important role. Some people believe supporting an avoidant means accepting endless distance or tolerating unhealthy behavior. That belief often damages both people. Emotional availability does not require abandoning personal standards. In fact, clear boundaries usually create more security for avoidance than inconsistent emotional reactions. Knowing that another person will remain kind while also respecting themselves creates stability. It removes the fear that the relationship depends entirely on emotional perfection. Healthy boundaries communicate strength without punishment. They show that closeness and independence can exist together. This balance is often misunderstood. Being emotionally available does not mean solving every emotional struggle for the avoidant. It means remaining open to honest communication without forcing emotional progress. If the avoidant shares something personal, the goal is not to immediately demand more vulnerability. The goal is to receive that moment with calm attention. Simple understanding often creates greater emotional safety than endless reassurance. When vulnerability is met with acceptance instead of pressure, the nervous system slowly begins associating openness with security rather than danger. One of the biggest mistakes during this stage is moving faster than the avoidant's emotional processing can handle. Forward. Many avoidants need time to understand their own feelings before they can explain them to someone else. After an emotionally significant conversation, they may become quieter for a while. This silence often creates anxiety for the other person, who worries that everything has fallen apart again. In many cases, the avoidant is processing rather than withdrawing. Their mind is organizing emotions that feel unfamiliar. They are trying to understand experiences they previously ignored or suppressed. Allowing space for this internal process can prevent unnecessary conflict that interrupts genuine growth. This does not mean accepting endless uncertainty. Emotional processing has a purpose. Healthy relationships still require communication, accountability, and mutual effort. The difference lies in recognizing the pace of emotional development without demanding instant transformation. Growth built slowly often lasts longer because it becomes supported by new emotional habits instead of temporary emotional excitement. Trust also grows through consistency rather than emotional extremes. Grand promises feel comforting in the moment, but dependable actions shape long-term attachment. A relationship becomes emotionally safer each time honesty replaces avoidance. Each time conflict ends with respect instead of punishment. Each time personal space is balanced with emotional connection. These ordinary moments rarely attract attention, yet they quietly reshape the avoidant's internal expectations about intimacy. The nervous system begins learning that closeness no longer requires sacrificing independence or emotional safety. Another surprising detail is that genuine change often feels less dramatic than people expect. Many wait for one unforgettable breakthrough that permanently changes everything. Psychology rarely works that way. Real transformation is usually built from hundreds of ordinary interactions. A thoughtful conversation after a stressful day. A disagreement handled with patience. A boundary respected without resentment. A promise quietly kept. These moments appear small, but together they gradually replace years of defensive conditioning. The avoidant does not suddenly become fearless. Instead, fear slowly loses its ability to control every emotional decision. At the same time, patience should never become an excuse for ignoring unhealthy patterns. Understanding avoidant attachment does not require sacrificing self-respect. Emotional growth must move in both directions. The avoidant carries responsibility for facing uncomfortable emotions and communicating with greater honesty. Their partner carries responsibility for maintaining healthy boundaries and protecting their own emotional well-being. A relationship cannot thrive if only one person continues growing while the other remains unchanged. This distinction is essential because some people stay in painful situations believing that every sign of vulnerability guarantees lasting transformation. Genuine growth reveals itself through repeated actions over time. Greater consistency, more emotional accountability, increased willingness to repair mistakes. A stronger ability to remain present during difficult moments. These patterns matter far more than isolated emotional breakthroughs. When both people understand this process, the relationship begins shifting away from fear and toward emotional security. The avoidant slowly discovers that vulnerability does not always lead to loss of control. The partner learns that steady emotional presence is often more effective than relentless pursuit. Over time, the rare psychological glitch that first interrupted years of emotional defenses can become the beginning of something much deeper forward. Not because one extraordinary moment changed everything, but because countless ordinary moments quietly taught the nervous system a completely different definition of safety forward. Summarize that the glitch is not weakness, but a rare interruption of long-standing defensive patterns forward. Reinforce that recognizing this emotional shift requires observation rather than assumption. Emphasize that not every avoidant experiences lasting change forward, but authentic vulnerability should not be dismissed too quickly. Encourage viewers to distinguish genuine emotional growth from temporary emotional reactions forward. End with the message that lasting connection depends on mutual emotional safety, healthy boundaries, and consistent trust, rather than chasing or forcing intimacy forward. The greatest lesson in avoidant psychology is that the quietest moments are often the most important forward. The emotional glitch you learned about today is not proof that an avoidant has suddenly become a different person. It is not magic forward. It is not a guarantee that every relationship will succeed. It is something much more realistic and in many ways much more powerful forward. It is a rare interruption in a defensive system that may have protected someone for years or even decades. When those defenses begin to weaken, even for a short time forward, it creates a small opening into an emotional world that usually remains hidden from everyone, including the avoidant themselves. This is why assumptions can become so dangerous forward. Looking only at the surface often leads to the wrong conclusion. Hesitation may look like rejection. Silence may look like indifference. Confusion may look like a lack of love forward. Yet beneath those behaviors, a completely different emotional process may be unfolding. That does not mean every moment of uncertainty is a sign of hidden affection forward. It means real understanding comes from careful observation instead of quick judgment. Patterns always reveal more than isolated moments forward. It is equally important to remember that not every avoidant reaches lasting emotional change. Some people continue relying on the same protective strategies throughout life forward. Others begin changing but retreat before new habits become permanent. Growth depends on self-awareness, personal responsibility, emotional maturity forward, and a genuine willingness to face uncomfortable feelings. No amount of love, patience, or sacrifice can force another person to complete that journey before they are ready forward. This truth protects both hope and reality at the same time forward. That is why learning to recognize authentic vulnerability matters so much. Temporary loneliness, fear of losing someone forward, or emotional panic can create powerful reactions that disappear once the immediate crisis passes. Genuine emotional growth looks different. It develops slowly forward. It becomes visible through greater consistency, healthier communication, stronger accountability forward, and a growing ability to remain emotionally present even when vulnerability feels uncomfortable forward. Those quiet changes deserve attention because they reveal lasting progress rather than temporary emotion forward. The strongest relationships are not built by chasing someone who keeps running away. They are not built through endless reassurance, emotional pressure forward, or constant attempts to break another person's defenses. Lasting connection grows where emotional safety exists for both people. It grows where healthy boundaries are respected forward. It grows where trust is earned through repeated actions instead of dramatic promises. It grows when both people feel free to be honest without fear of control, rejection forward, or emotional punishment. Perhaps the most surprising discovery is that the real turning point is often much smaller than people expect. It may begin with one honest conversation. Forward. One thoughtful question. One calm response during conflict. One moment when vulnerability is met with understanding instead of pressure. Those moments rarely make headlines. Forward. But they slowly reshape the emotional patterns that once seemed impossible to change. If this video gave you a new perspective on avoidant attachment, forward, let us know by leaving a comment about the insight that surprised you the most. Forward. Your experiences may help someone else understand a relationship they have been struggling to make sense of. If you found this deep dive valuable, forward, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more evidence-based insights into attachment, relationships, and human psychology. Forward. Sometimes the smallest shift inside the human mind changes the course of an entire relationship. Forward. And learning to recognize that shift may be the difference between walking away from an ending and standing at the beginning of a completely different story.